to be more depressing. The topic, of course, is the loss of reality during this past week of redevelopment funding for affordable housing in California. And to fully understand this magnitude of that loss, I'd like to start by taking just a minute to review the kind of resources redevelopment is providing for affordable housing throughout California in the last years. In the most recent year, we have reports that have been ended about 18 months ago. Redevelopment agencies deposited close to $1.7 billion into their affordable housing fund, of which over $1 billion came from property tax increments received that year. As many of you know, property tax increment is the property tax that the redevelopment agencies receive from the growth and assessed value in their redevelopment project areas. And of course, they were required at a minimum to deposit 20% of that tax increment each year into their affordable housing fund. As you can see, agencies actually, in the most recent reporting year, spent a little more than they deposited. That is close to $1.8 billion, of which nearly $1 billion was actually for direct provision of new affordable housing programs and projects. Looked at another way, agencies were involved in contributing toward 17,500 units in the most recent reporting period, including new units, rehabilitated units, and units assisted in various other ways, making redevelopment really the largest state-funded affordable housing program. And as my colleagues can attest from what they do every day in their professional lives, was also the most flexible gap funding source to leverage other public and private funding. And so it's a loss not only in the absolute dollars, but also in the additional dollars that it helped leverage into the affordable housing program in California. I would say one other thing too, which is, aside from the 20% set aside, of course, redevelopment also contributed to infrastructure development at the local level that helps support the kind of sustainable community strategies that are being developed throughout the region. But no more. As of 3 days ago, all 400 redevelopment agencies in the state of California were dissolved. The future flow of property tax increment for affordable housing has been ended forever. Agencies are now in the wind-down process of having their assets liquidated and debts paid off, so that we will be returning to a property tax system where the tax increment that formerly went to agencies, including for affordable housing, will now go to schools and local governments for their needs. I would submit that this is the largest sea change in local government finance since Prop 13 over 3 decades ago. And so it leads to some important questions. How did the state get to this position? What's left from affordable housing assets, from redevelopment assets that can continue to be used in the short run? And in the longer run, what kind of replacements can we come up with so as to minimize the adverse effects on affordable housing in California? I'll try to take us back to the first two issues. My colleagues are going to begin the dialogue, which we can continue the question and answer period about how do we replace this dynamic financial engine. And so, to answer the first question, we're going to do a really quick version of the life and death of California redevelopment. Redevelopment agencies were created, and the system of tax increment financing created in the 40s and 50s. And into the 60s, actually, it was still a fairly focused program, mostly in large inner-city downtown areas like Oakland, San Francisco, LA, Long Beach. It wasn't until the 70s and 80s that the program mushroomed. There started to be a conflict between redevelopment at the local level and its financing system and the state budget financing system, including how the state was put under more and more pressure to provide funding for local schools to equalize and increase the level of funding for local schools. This tension grew over the last 2 decades, the last decade of the 20th century and the first decade of the 21st century, with Sacramento more and more trying to rein in redevelopment, and on 8 different annual occasions actually raising redevelopment funds to help solve the state budget crisis problem. And so in the most recent year, 2010, redevelopment agencies were claiming about $5 billion of tax increment, and the state felt that about $2 billion of those dollars, which would have otherwise gone to school districts, were required by the state to be subsidized or subpoenaed, and so the state was feeling that it was in fact subsidizing $2 billion of the redevelopment program. That led to the ultimate showdown which started only 15 months ago when the voters of California approved Prop 22, which on the surface seemed to be a victory for the redevelopment of the affordable housing community. It said that the state could no longer raise redevelopment funds once they had been allocated to redevelopment agencies. But in an audacious move, once he was sworn in as governor, Governor Brown immediately, in his last January budget message, said that what ought to happen is redevelopment agencies should be dissolved completely on the theory that while you can't take money away from redevelopment agencies once they've received it, if you get rid of redevelopment agencies altogether, they never get it and you don't violate Proposition 22. The governor came close. Remember last year at this time he was working on a bipartisan budget on a 2/3 vote basis so that some of his tax measures could get before the voters last November. That of course didn't happen, but he came close during that bipartisan effort to getting the 2/3 vote to dissolve redevelopment completely. Instead what happened, and those of you looking closely will see that there's a typo that should change. I'm not going to apologize for that. The legislature came up with a compromise as part of the actual state budget on a majority basis, in which first they did dissolve all 400 redevelopment agencies, but then in what I think was a reasonable kind of compromise, gave redevelopment agencies an opportunity to buy their way back into existence if they agreed to live with a reduced amount of money for ongoing redevelopment, including affordable housing, so that some of the former property tax increment could then go to schools and local governments to try to redirect the balance. Because it is true, redevelopment had grown to the point where about 12% of all property taxes in the state of California were going to redevelopment. And I think you could have a fair debate of whether that was perhaps too big a program in comparison to the other needs of the state. But a lot of people who work with redevelopment and affordable housing themselves felt like this is maybe a reasonable compromise to keep the best of redevelopment and affordable housing going, but to recognize that everybody's got to share some sacrifice in terms of making sure our school systems, our higher education systems, our social welfare, safety net continue to be funded in the state of California. So it appeared for a while that we had perhaps a good solution, or at least a livable solution. And so, again, most of you should say 2011, not 2012. Over 80% of the redevelopment agencies said begrudgingly, we can live with this new system. We will work with this new system. But at the same time, the League of California Cities and the California Redevelopment Association took a more hardline view. We're going to see if we get the whole thing overturned and get back to the old status quo protected by Prop 22. And so they asked the Supreme Court to overthrow both parts of the legislation. When you take a high-risk strategy and you go to the court system instead of trying to deal with people to come to compromise, you sometimes get the result that really you didn't want, and probably very few people in the whole state wanted, which is the Supreme Court came up with a bifurcated decision whereby on the one hand it said that the solution of redevelopment that the agencies, as the governor suggested, did not actually violate Prop 22, but the voluntary opt-in to continue on a more streamlined basis in fact violated Prop 22 because in some sense, in the view of 6 of the 7 Supreme Court justices, it was not truly voluntary. And so what started out as a victory for redevelopment in Prop 22 turned out to be the demise of redevelopment, and it didn't need to happen. But, and for those of you who follow politics in Sacramento locally, it's a very cautionary tale about if you go for all or nothing, sometimes you get what you get. And so what we got is 3 days ago, all redevelopment agencies were dissolved and the unwind process. Let's talk very quickly about what that process means and what it allows for continued affordable housing on a much reduced scale. Of course, the agencies went away, but all their assets, their land, their money didn't go away, and all their liabilities didn't go away. So somebody's got to deal with unwinding it, kind of like a bankruptcy situation. And so what's been created, for the most part, is a system of successor agencies and oversight boards, the role of unwinding the assets and liabilities of the redevelopment agencies. In most communities, the successor agency is going to be the community that formed the redevelopment agency, whether city or county. You can see on this slide what their charges are doing. Ultimately, get rid of all the assets, cap all the debts, and return us to a property tax system where the money flows down to local governments and schools. But there's a small portion of that system that instead will go to what I call a housing function successor. Again, In most cases, that will be the city or county that form the redevelopment agency, although in a few cases it will be a local housing authority. In a few of the cases, it may even be the State Department of Housing and Community Development. Their role as housing successors will not be to unwind, but to take a limited set of assets that the redevelopment agencies have, land that they purchased with these affordable housing funds, or loan portfolios that they have made to first-time home buyers, other homeowners, affordable housing developers who have promised to pay, usually on a deferred and low-interest basis, some money back in to the redevelopment agencies for continued affordable housing. So those land and loan portfolio resources will be available to the housing successors who, in most cases, continue a rather modest version of what had formerly been a more robust redevelopment affordable housing program. The most important thing that's still at issue is what happens to the existing fund balances in the redevelopment housing funds. Those funds where I said in the most recent year, about $1.7 billion statewide was going in. And so a number of former redevelopment agencies in the Bay Area have a fairly large unencumbered housing fund balance that could be used to continue, at least for the next couple of years, funding of pipeline projects that are already underway, and perhaps give us a period of time to divide the next funding source, long-term source for affordable housing. So what happens to these funds is of great importance, I think. And under the current law, unfortunately, it says that those funds go to the successor agency for unwind purposes, so they're not available for affordable housing. But Senator Steinberg has introduced SB 654, which I understand the league has endorsed, that would reverse that. So this $1.4 billion statewide of unencumbered housing fund balances could be used to keep some projects going for the next couple of years. Very important. Senator Steinberg got it through the Senate on Tuesday, the last day it could possibly make it through, but it had originally been set up as an urgency statute, so it would take effect as soon as the Assembly agreed and the governor hopefully signed. And it's important that it take effect immediately for two reasons. One is because the money right now is into the unwind system, and if it stays there for too long, it's going to disappear. And number two, the money is needed for the affordable housing projects in the pipeline, and if you wait till next January, which is how the bill is now structured, because it's not urgency, it may be too late for many of those pipeline projects that have options on land or funding, other funding sources that will disappear if the match isn't there. So it's critical to try to make sure that SB 654 and a companion bill that got introduced yesterday in the Assembly, AB 1585, return to an urgency basis so that they can be enacted hopefully in the near future so that some of the pipeline affordable housing projects can continue. But that's the limited possible silver lining, and the ultimate result of my story, I'm afraid, is that we have lost the best state funding source for redevelopment. And so we're now all facing a challenge, and groups like this are good at facing challenges. And the folks who I'm going to turn this over to after Linda introduces them are excellent at facing challenges. We need to come up with a replacement to continue to do the good job of affordable housing. It's absolutely critical to the state. Thank you.